Ladies and gentlemen, don't worry, I'm not going to play the violin, for those of you who are in the lecture. Instead, I wanted just to say a brief word of introduction about the programme tonight. I'm sure you saw it billed as having a connection with Einstein. Let me just briefly expand on what that connection is. So the first piece is a Mozart sonata. I think I mentioned in the lecture that Einstein loved both Mozart and Bach. I think he had difficulty in deciding which he preferred. And we know that he played all of the Mozart sonatas from quite an early age. Indeed, he was playing Mozart sonatas by himself, which really converted him to playing the violin as a serious activity. He had a dreadful teacher who bored him severely, and he hated practicing, but he did practice the Mozart sonatas. He certainly played this one. This is a very interesting Mozart sonata. It's one of the finest in my view. It starts very unusually with a slow and stately movement, and then leads up to a fantastic final movement, which is typical Mozart tune you can't get out of your head once you've heard it. So Mozart is, if you like, Einstein's bread and butter. It was what he played every day whenever he could. The next piece by Brahms also has an interesting Einstein connection. There's a recording of a letter from Einstein when he was very young. He moved to a tiny Swiss village called Aarau in order to prepare himself for the entrance examination for the ETH Zurich, one of the finest universities in Switzerland. And while he was there, the great violinist Joseph Joachim, who was a great friend of Brahms, and indeed collaborated with Brahms on his concerto and many of the sonatas, was playing in the vicinity of Aarau, and this letter records that Einstein practiced the G major sonata that you're going to hear very hard in order to get the full benefit from going to hear Joachim play it. And Joachim, of course, was very directly involved in writing it. My view, and I have to admit to being a passionate fan of Brahms, is that this is the finest, most beautiful violin sonata that anybody ever wrote. But you're of course at liberty to tell me whether you think that's right or not. Anyway, you've got a treat in store listening to that. The final piece is rather more unusual in terms of the Einstein connection. Einstein, generally speaking, hated modern music. Ernest Bloch was, of course, a modern composer, and some of his works, particularly his first violin sonata, is really rather atonal and quite loud. But Einstein, for reasons that I have to admit I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows, Einstein was a strong supporter of Bloch. Now, one reason was certainly that Bloch was a very Jewish composer. He wrote lots of very Jewish tunes and had a great pride in being Jewish, and so did Einstein. So that was certainly a relation. But they must have known each other as friends, and it's not documented, and I really don't know why Einstein was such a strong supporter of this relatively modern composer, but he was, and indeed he was president of the Ernest Bloch Society, the first president of the Ernest Bloch Society. I happen to be honoured to be a vice president of the Ernest Bloch Society, not because I know an awful lot about Bloch's music. I suspect because they thought they'd better have a physicist if Einstein was the president. However, these pieces are a particularly fine example of Bloch's work. You will recognise the very Jewish idiom of these three pieces. They're often separated, and only the middle one, Nigun, is played. I think that's a great shame. As you will hear, the three pieces go together very beautifully, and the final piece in particular is incredibly energetic and exciting, and has an incredible ending for the violin, one of these things which is so incredibly difficult to play, a very high artificial harmonic, fortissimo, which is an enormous, fantastic effect. So it's a remarkable program, and Einstein would have loved all of these pieces, so I hope you'll enjoy them as much as I will. Thank you.